Hi everyone, I'm excited for our sun-kissed mini this month. It's adorable. I can just envision all of your laundry rooms or your friends' laundry rooms decorated with this adorable mini. When Julia sent it to me, I just used the scraps of the quilt that I just did for her. So I just pieced the back, and that's one of the beautiful things about minis is that you can use up all those pieces from projects in the past. So I'm just going to go over a checklist of things to do before you do your free motion quilting. So you've got your machine, and I always like to have a few bobbins of the thread. If I have a few bobbins, then it just helps me that I don't have to rethread, take it out and redo it. So that's something that I like to have on hand, and I just keep them beside my machine. The other thing I like to do is I like to clean out my machine and just kind of check under here. I have a pipe cleaner or a little piece of batting, and I just kind of scoop it all in there and clean it out. So that's a really good practice to have. Same thing with your bobbin. Quite often we can get lint stuck in there, and as I've said in the past, what happens with the lint, it gets compressed so much, it actually turns into like a felt. And so then having that felt there takes up space, and then it reduces the ability for the spring that's in our bobbin to work correctly. So just even, I use a long pin in here, and I just kind of slide it in my bobbin, and different people have different bobbins, but it's just a good idea to get, see, I just have a little bit of lint, and just getting rid of that really does help. Anything to reduce tension troubles. We talked a lot about our troubleshooting for tension last month. So just having a nice clean bobbin really makes a difference. And then always knowing what direction our thread goes in makes also a big difference. Okay, so that has a nice slide that comes out. This has been cleaned, so I'm feeling good about that. If you can't remember the last time you changed your needle, you need to change your needle. And I was working on a project last night and I broke 2 needles. So I know for sure that I have a nice fresh needle, and having a nice fresh needle makes a really big difference. I use the comparison, if you're gonna build a house, you wanna use quality materials, and the same thing with your sewing. You wanna use quality thread, quality needles. It might cost a little bit more, but in the long run, it's totally worth it. So the other thing I do, I don't know if you have decided whether you like having your feed dogs up or down, depending on your sewing machine, what works better for you. I tend to keep my feed dogs up, so I have those engaged. And of course, I'm gonna want to figure out my design because I need to know what kind of foot I wanna put on my machine. So if I'm going to do some walking stitches, so if I want to maybe do some perimeter sewing, in there, I'm going to use my walking foot. And that is a super helpful tool. If I'm going to be doing my free motion quilting, and this month we are going to be doing paisleys. And so we want to use our darning foot, which has the spring on it, and that's the foot we're going to use for that. So it's always good to have it in check. The other thing that I tend to do is I pretty much always have some sort of notebook that I'm keeping at all times, because I think, as you can relate, we're creative people, and so a lot of times we have ideas, but also it's a good idea to, like we talked about last time, was our tension. So knowing where our dials should be. This mini, I'm actually only doing 1 layer of batting. So I have, this is actually a polyester batting, which depending on the look that you want afterwards with your quilt, a polyester batting can be wonderful. So I have a polyester in here. I just did a bunch of quilts with poly, so I have a bunch of that scrap that I want to use up, and I've decided that I'm just going to do 1 layer of batting for this project. So the other thing, of course, is my gloves. I like to have my materials. Oh, so going back to, here are my gloves here. It's a good idea to keep notes on things and what works best for you, what doesn't. And so even if you want to keep this notebook handy, like in your desk drawer or whatever it is, it's a good idea to have that on hand. Okay, so my light burnt out on my machine. So luckily I have my big light for my long arm and that helps me. But I do miss my light and it's one of those on my to-do list. I need to go and get a light bulb so I can change that up. All right, so we're just gonna go over our design. Now, as you can see, it's beautifully constructed. We have some applique on here. So we need to decide what we're going to do. Now, my idea is, this is an art piece. It's not kind of, it is an art piece. And so depending on your comfort level of your quilting, you can decide what you want to do. So in my mind, I really like the idea of this is a sheet. And so I can have one design in the sheet. Here we have another one. And so I could have one design in here. Here's the background. So then I can do one design in the background. And then with the border, do I decide to do a separate design for the border or do I have that all the same? So as a quilt artist, that's totally up to you. If you want to change the threads, when I do the custom quilting, in fact, I just did a quilt for Julia and I used 4 different colors of thread. I had a purple, a blue, a yellow, a white, and and a green, so I had 5. And so if you want to do that, you can. If you want to just do a neutral that just goes with it, it's totally up to you. If you want to do an all over design, like the paisleys I'm going to show you, totally. If you want to do the custom, which that's kind of how my brain works, then you can do that too. So I'm going to, the other thing that I like to do, of course, as you noticed in our classes, is I really like to doodle. And I do have a class that I teach. It's if you can draw it, you can quilt it. And if you feel like you can't draw it, because a lot of people say, I can't draw, I can teach you how to do those. So I break it down into steps and I teach you those designs and then we learn how to combine those designs in a happy way. All right, so when I first started teaching pre-motion quilting, I started with teaching stippling, but I realized there's a lot of steps involved to do a stipple. So I started actually, I feel like paisley is a really good go-to design. And then we go, after our paisley, we're going to go into the stipple. The other thing to consider when you're planning out your Sun Drenched quilting pattern is that you have now learned straight line quilting, you've learned your E's and L's, you've learned your loops, and you've learned your daisies. And so a lot of those designs will look really good in your quilt. So I encourage you to mix it up and to review those things. So it's really fun. Now, with the paisley, what you're going to be doing is you're going to come down. First, yeah, this pen is going to work. There we go. So it's basically a teardrop. So you can see that. But when you're coming in, so you're going to come in. And I do a few variations of paisleys. So then I come in, I come around, and I find this one is actually an easier pattern, but you can decide. And then I'm going to come back. I'm going to do like a U, but I'm coming to this point. And it's just like when we did the daisy, you want to really have a definite point, turn it around, and then come back out. So you're going to trace. And now you're going to come back around, and then you're going to trace. So you're kind of doing this, I call it kind of an open toe paisley. And then you're going to come back. And then, so here you have an opening. It's like this opening here. So I'm going to come back into my opening. And then I can branch out once again in my V. And then I can either come back into this V opening. I have this opening and I have this opening. So one of the nice things about a paisley is that you actually have all these openings available to you. And what you decide is so you can come back into this section here. And then you echo your design. And then you can echo that one. And so you can decide if you want to do the open toe one that comes here. Or you're going to come in here and do your open toe like that. And then you can do your open toe. Now, one of the things I've talked about is when you're quilting your designs, you're going to want to be able to quilt them up to down, left to right, right to left, upside down. So you're going to be able to have to draw in all those different directions. So this is a perfect way to do that. The other thing, remembering that we spoke about when you're quilting, you need to have, actually, I don't know if we talked about this. I teach so often, but I'll just review it quickly. When you're quilting, you need to have a plan. So here's your quilt. And you break it up into a section. So do you start over here? So that I call this an A, and this is B, C, and D. So do you go A, B, C, D? So you quilt, you fill up this square, this, and then bring yourself over here, come to over here, and come up. Or do you start in the middle, and then you kind of quilt around, 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 around? Or do you go from here to here and kind of do a swoopy? There's so many different ways. And in my videos, through Riley Blake, we have worksheets, and that can help you to kind of decide. One of the reasons I really love to draw it out is so that I can create that muscle memory, and I talk about that a lot, but it is really important. And so if you plan to fail, fail to plan. So if you have a plan, you're going to be successful. Now, so that's I call this my open toe paisley. Now the other paisley that I first learned was I did my teardrop, and then I came back, and I came back to that point, and then I did my teardrop. Now, so I'm always coming to this. Now I'm going to do the same thing, and then I can come back. Now I have that open V, so I'm going to come back and back. So now we have, this is an opening and this is an opening. So then I start branching out. The other thing that I can do is that I can change my direction of my paisley. So this one is kind of coming down. So then I can come out this way. If I want to do two, I can do two. And then I can come bring it around like this. If I want to swoop it in, I can. Now, if I want to change directions, I don't want to have to come out here. All I do, so my traveling is I echo. So using that echo allows me to travel. And one of the things that you need to think about when you're quilting, here you see, even though this has 3 and this has more, and this one the same thing, the key is to keep this spacing relatively consistent. So it doesn't really matter how many times you echo that one design. As long as you're keeping this spacing fairly consistent, your quilting is going to look really uniform, and it's going to look really beautiful. And it's going to have that movement in there. So that's basically how you're going to do your paisley. So the key things to remember about the paisley is you want to have that nice shape. And when you come back into that shape, you want it to come together. And then the other part about it is that you have to look for these V-shaped openings. And so those are where you're going to travel to. And then the other part is, if you want to travel, all you need to do is echo into that place that you want to go to. And to keep it a really beautiful stitch, you want to keep the spacing rather uniform. So those are the 4 key points of having a beautiful paisley quilt.